We're fortunate to have Bob Emiliani on the show today, but not to discuss education this time, but rather to discuss leadership, which, I don't know, in my mind really go hand in hand. Bob's most recent book is Nobody is Exempt from Improvement, and you see it there on the screen, available on Amazon. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
Well, great. No, in your book, Nobody is Exempt from Improvement, you are focusing, I thought this was interesting, on improving leadership, but you refer to treating leadership as a process. That's kind of interesting. I mean, what do you mean by leadership as a process?
Well, it's a very different perspective than what's normally taken. The focus is on improving leadership by improving the daily work that leaders do. So the traditional approach taken to improve leadership is to focus on improving a few leaders' behaviors. And while improved behaviors is necessary, it's certainly not sufficient. And by itself, if you were to just focus on improving leadership behaviors, what you find through the industrial psychologist community is that this has a very low rate of success, on the order of single-digit %. So despite a lot of time, effort, money spent on leadership training, most of which is focused on behaviors, we still have a preponderance of poor leadership. So it took me a long time to recognize leadership as consisting of many processes, 15 processes in fact. There can be a few more, but the main bulk of what leaders do is contained within 15 processes. And so let me just run through it for everybody so they understand, get a sense of this. The first one is leading and managing people. The second one is planning and budgeting. Third is workload management. Fourth, decision making. Fifth, problem recognition and response. Six, problem solving. Seven, management reviews. 8, employee feedback and coaching. 9, team meetings. 10, asking questions, listening and receiving feedback. 11, information sharing. 12, developing people. 13, performance appraisal. 14, walking around and go see. And finally, 15, stakeholder engagement, where stakeholders are customers, suppliers, investors in the community. So instead of a handful of bad leadership behaviors that need to be corrected, what we end up finding is that there's dozens of errors that can occur within each one of those 15 leadership categories, resulting in 400 to 500 individual leadership process errors. And what this tells us is that leadership is actually an error-prone activity. Most people think that because they're in a leadership position that a number of errors they make are few, but in fact leadership is an error-prone activity. And it's much more of a amateur kind of activity than it is professional work, as shocking as that might sound.
Hey, Bob, it occurs to me as you were saying that if leadership is a process, then leadership basically could be taught then, right? I mean, if it's a process, then you should be able to, at least the process part of it should be able to be taught, regardless of whether that person is personable as a leader or has, quote, leadership potential. But the process part of it could be taught, right?
That's correct. And specifically in identifying the precise errors that people tend to make within each one of those 15 processes that I just mentioned. So it's a much more robust way of looking at leadership, and it's much more specific and actionable.
Okay.
Bob, you write in your book, improvement, I'm quoting here, improvement cannot be without purpose. The reachable goal of improving leadership processes is to improve the organization's culture as informed by leadership's thinking and actions. So to get your foot in the door of changing how a leader thinks, is it by showing him or her a different way to learn?
Yes, it is, and a better and more effective way to improve. Again, it's far more specific and actionable than what you typically find. The typical approach to leadership development is something called HR competency models, which are almost exclusively focused on behaviors. So leadership process errors are much more specific and actionable than the behavioral errors. And of course, we all know that you can't improve if you don't know about problems, and improvement is possible once these problems are recognized. And this is not a theoretical construct. This is something that I developed a few years ago, and I've used it in class, and I asked the students to come up with errors for each one of the 15 leadership processes that they see with their managers, past and present, and they have no problem in coming up with dozens of errors per category, hundreds in total.
Hey Bob, you mentioned specific things, and can you give us a couple of specific things or processes that a leader can do in order to begin a process, approach to leading, some down-to-earth stuff here?
Yeah, well, the down-to-earth stuff is first they have to recognize that the errors that they make in each one of the 15 processes, as well as the effect that those errors have on employees. These things are not for free. When leaders make errors in how they interact with employees, that causes employees to spend time thinking about things, getting stressed out about things that the leaders might have said. So there is an effect on employees' physical and mental health. So one way of approaching it is leaders can look at the errors that are identified in the book and select basically from a menu of errors. If they're honest, they'll say, yeah, I do that, yeah, I do that, yeah, I do that. And then that forms the basis for improvement. And the way you improve is simply by applying, in general, Kaizen, PDCA, scientific method, but as well as specifically standard worksheets, standard work combination sheets, and visual controls. So it's consistent in its thinking with lean principles and practices through and through.
Okay, suppose, one thing you've mentioned a couple times is that a leader has to recognize that they need to improve. Suppose you have a leader who refuses to admit that they need to improve, that they're the leader and their way is the highway, or they're perfect, or whatever. What does an employee do at that point besides look for another job?
Yeah, well, that of course is a problem, and obviously a board of directors has a responsibility to hire leaders that are able, that are humble, that are able to admit that they need to improve. I titled the book "Nobody is Exempt from Improvement" for a reason, is because most leaders think they are exempt from improvement, and so it's a signal. A message. Now, what you said is indeed true, and employees suffer from leaders who don't think they need to improve. They suffer as a result of it. So I'm trying in this book to make the connection between these errors and the negative health effect and that bad leadership has on employees, because one of the things leaders are concerned about is, of course, healthcare costs. And the connection here is, well, if you improve your leadership, it has a positive effect on employee health. It's not in the leader's job description to harm employees in any way. But unfortunately, getting back to your point is, yes, sometimes you have leaders who refuse to admit they need to improve, and employees are going to have to find ways to survive that, as I've done, you've probably had to do, everybody has to do, with the help of some coping mechanisms to gain a modicum of control over their life through exercise, yoga, meditation, music, what have you, sport. In those kind of situations, there's really no other choice than to do that.
Okay, well, Bob, you cover these topics and a lot more in your book, Nobody is Exempt from Improvement. I know it's available on Amazon. Anywhere else besides Amazon? Your own website by any chance?
Nope, it's Amazon. It's a Kindle book, so it's an e-book. It's not available as a print book, but it is an e-book, and it's a quick but powerful read. I think it'll be very eye-opening to people to see a completely different way of looking at leadership.
Okay. Well, Bob Emiliani, author of Nobody is Exempt from Improvement. Thanks for joining us on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Sure. Take care.